My son didn't know I was awake. He leaned over my hospital bed and whispered, "If he signs the transfer tonight, we won't need to waste money keeping him alive much longer." I lay completely still, eyes closed, tears sliding silently into my ears. Not because I was dying, because the person saying it was my firstborn son. Then my daughter whispered nervously, "What if Dad hears us?" A quiet laugh came from the corner. "He can barely move," my youngest son said. "Relax," and then nobody disagreed. Not one of them. At that exact moment, I realized something horrifying. My children weren't waiting for me to recover. They were waiting for me to die. What none of them knew was that 2 hours earlier, I had already changed everything. Every account, every property, every investment. $48 million gone from their reach. And before this story ended, my children were going to learn what greed really costs. My name is George Miller. I'm 70 years old. And until 3 months ago, I believed I had a beautiful family. I spent most of my life inside a repair garage, fixing engines, with broken hands and sleepless eyes. But every sacrifice felt worth it because my children smiled. Daniel wanted college tuition. I worked weekends. Rebecca dreamed of private school. I sold the lake cabin my wife loved. Eric got arrested over gambling debt at 22. I emptied half my retirement savings protecting him. Every time life punished my children, I rescued them. And slowly, I taught them something dangerous, that Dad would always fix everything. My wife Margaret warned me years ago. A few weeks before cancer took her, she sat beside me on our back porch watching rain fall across the yard. "George," she whispered softly, "when I'm gone, stop saving the children from consequences." I remember laughing quietly. "They're good kids." Margaret looked at me sadly. "No," she whispered. "They were good kids." At the time, I thought fear made her emotional. Now I realize she saw the future before I did. The stroke happened on a Tuesday morning. 1 second I was repairing a truck engine. The next, the floor hit my face. When I woke up inside the hospital, my children surrounded the bed pretending to be devastated. Rebecca cried loudly. Daniel thanked the doctors dramatically. Eric held my hand saying, "Thank God you're okay, Dad, honestly." For a little while, I believed them. Then my financial advisor visited, and everything changed. Years ago, one of my customers begged me to invest in his tiny technology company. Nobody believed in him, but I did. Over time, that tiny company exploded internationally. My shares became worth millions, $48 million. I never told my children because I wanted them to build their own lives instead of waiting for inheritance. But somehow, they found out. And the moment they did, their faces changed. Not excitement. Calculation. Cold calculation. That same night, while pretending to sleep, I overheard them outside my hospital room. "If Dad transfers everything now, taxes become easier," Daniel whispered. "We should sell the house immediately after," Rebecca replied. Then Eric laughed quietly. "At his age, we honestly don't have long to wait anyway." They laughed after that. Laughed, I stared into darkness while tears rolled down my face. Not because I was dying, because my children sounded disappointed I survived. After that night, every conversation became about paperwork. Documents, transfers, accounts. Nobody asked if I was scared. Nobody asked if I needed anything. One evening, Daniel entered my room carrying files. "Dad, sign these while you still can. While you still can." Even his words sounded like countdowns to my death. I looked carefully at the documents. Power of attorney. Property access. Investment control. Everything. I asked quietly, "What happens if I refuse?" Nobody answered. Then Rebecca crossed her arms impatiently. "Dad, stop making this difficult." Difficult. I sacrificed my entire life for those children. And now my existence itself had become an inconvenience. A week later, they brought me home from the hospital. At first I thought maybe things would calm down. Then one night I overheard them arguing downstairs. "We can't wait forever," Rebecca snapped. "He's delaying transfers," Daniel replied. Then Eric said something that turned my blood cold. "If the old man ends up in a nursing home, controlling everything becomes easier." Silence followed. Nobody defended me. And at that exact moment, something inside me quietly died. 3 days later, they drove me to Green Meadows Nursing Center through heavy rain. Nobody spoke during the drive. When we arrived, Daniel signed paperwork quickly while Eric checked his phone. Then, just before leaving, my youngest son smiled. "At least now we can finally breathe." That sentence should have destroyed me. Instead, for the first time in weeks, I felt calm. Because sitting silently inside that wheelchair, watching my children walk away, I realized something they still didn't know. They thought they were abandoning a week-old man. But they had actually abandoned $48 million, and I was finally done saving them. The first night inside Green Meadows Nursing Center, I didn't sleep. I just sat beside the window watching rain slide down the glass while old memories replayed inside my head. Daniel learning to ride a bicycle, Rebecca sleeping on my chest during thunderstorms, Eric running toward me after school yelling, "Dad." Sometimes I wonder which version of my children was real, those innocent little kids or the strangers who abandoned me. Maybe greed changes people slowly. Maybe love dies quietly. Around 2 a.m, I heard crying through the wall beside my room. Not loud crying, the kind people do when they don't want anyone hearing them. Broken little sounds. The next morning, I asked Nurse Emma about it. She looked uncomfortable before answering. His family promised they'd visit for his birthday yesterday. I glanced toward the hallway. They never came? Emma shook her head slowly. No one's visited him in 8 months. 8 months. That number stayed inside my head all day, because suddenly I realized something terrifying. Nursing homes aren't full of old people. They're full of forgotten people. And slowly, I was becoming one of them. Emma became the only person who treated me like I still mattered. Every morning she brought coffee exactly the way I liked it. No sugar, little milk. She remembered small things. Funny how strangers sometimes show more humanity than family. One afternoon, while helping me walk through the garden, she suddenly asked, "Can I ask you something honestly?" I nodded. "Why do you still defend your children?" I looked confused. "What do you mean?" "Every time they hurt you, you still make excuses for them." That question followed me for the rest of the night. Maybe parents are built differently. Even after children destroy us, part of us still wants to protect them. 3 weeks passed before Rebecca finally visited. The moment she entered my room, I noticed something strange. She looked guilty, not fake sad, actually guilty. She sat beside my bed, quietly staring at her hands, then softly whispered, "Dad, are you okay here?" That simple question almost broke me, because for one dangerous second, she sounded like my daughter again. Not someone chasing money, just my little girl. Then she looked around the room and tears filled her eyes. I didn't think this place would be so depressing. I smiled weakly. It grows on you. Rebecca suddenly started crying softly, real tears. And honestly, that hurt more than cruelty, because it reminded me there was still humanity left inside her somewhere. Then she whispered something unexpected. I tried stopping Daniel. I stayed quiet. He said putting you here was temporary. Temporary, funny word. People always use soft words for cruel things. For a moment, I almost forgave everything. Then Rebecca slowly reached inside her purse and placed documents onto my blanket. And just like that, the illusion disappeared. Investment access forms, property authority, money, always money. Rebecca noticed my expression immediately. It's just so Daniel can't manipulate things. I looked directly into her eyes. And you won't? Silence. That silence told me everything. After she left, Emma entered carrying dinner. She saw the papers immediately. They came for signatures again? I nodded quietly. Emma looked genuinely angry. You know what's sad? I looked up. They don't realize they're running out of time with you. That sentence hit harder than she realized, because money blinds people into thinking parents will live forever. That same night I remembered something Margaret once did years ago. I had the flu badly and couldn't leave the garage. Snow covered the roads, and somehow Margaret still drove 3 hours just to bring me homemade soup because she didn't want me eating alone. That was love. Not words, effort, care, and suddenly I realized something painful. My children inherited my kindness, but not Margaret's heart. The next morning, my lawyer Michael arrived carrying updated documents, the final transfer papers. He sat beside me quietly. Are you absolutely certain? I looked toward the rainy window. Then I remembered Daniel whispering, we won't need to keep him alive much longer. I remembered Eric smiling outside the nursing home, and Rebecca sliding financial papers across my blanket moments after crying. Slowly, I nodded. Yes. Michael hesitated briefly before speaking again. You're leaving Emma more than half. She earned it. Because during the worst months of my life, Emma treated me like a human being, while my own children treated me like an obstacle. Just before Michael left, Emma entered carrying fresh towels. She noticed the legal documents immediately. Her face changed. George? No. Michael looked surprised. Emma stepped closer, shaking her head. I don't want your money. That moment mattered more to me than she'll ever understand, because for the first time in months, someone cared more about Emmy than what I owned. I smiled softly. That's exactly why you deserve it. Emma's eyes filled with tears instantly. And somewhere outside those walls, my children still believed they were waiting for $48 million. They had absolutely no idea. Their future was already disappearing. 2 months after abandoning me inside that nursing home, my children finally realized something was wrong, because suddenly their access to my money started disappearing. Daniel discovered one of the investment accounts had been locked completely. Eric's emergency withdrawal request was denied, and Rebecca learned the house had quietly been transferred into a protected trust. For the first time since my stroke, they looked nervous, not worried about me, worried about the money. Daniel arrived first. The moment he entered my room, I could feel anger radiating from him. No fake smile, no pretending to care, just rage. He closed the door behind him and threw paperwork onto my bed. What the hell is this? I calmly adjusted my glasses. Good to see you too. Don't play games with me, Dad. Interesting. Suddenly I was Dad again the moment money disappeared. Daniel pointed toward the documents. You transferred the accounts. I looked at him quietly. Yes. Why? Such a simple question. But the answer had taken me 70 years to understand. I stared directly into my son's eyes. Because I finally realized something. Daniel crossed his arms impatiently. What? You love my money more than you love me. Silence. Heavy silence. For a moment, something almost flickered across his face. Guilt, maybe. Then it disappeared. That's not fair. I almost laughed hearing that. Fair? Was it fair discussing my death outside a hospital room? Was it fair abandoning me inside this place? Was it fair treating me like a burden after I spent my entire life protecting them? No. Fairness left this family a long time ago. Daniel lowered his voice carefully. You're being manipulated. There it is, I whispered. What? The excuse. His jaw tightened immediately. That nurse is turning you against your family. I slowly shook my head. No, Daniel. Then I leaned slightly closer. You did that yourselves. The room became completely silent after that. because deep down, he knew I was right. Later that evening, Rebecca arrived unexpectedly. Unlike Daniel, she didn't look angry. She looked exhausted. Her makeup was slightly smeared, like she'd been crying before arriving. The moment she sat beside my bed, she whispered, "Please don't destroy this family." Destroy. Funny word coming from someone who helped tear it apart. I stayed quiet. Rebecca looked down at her trembling hands. Daniel says, "You're giving everything away." I watched her carefully, not because I hated her, because I was searching for the daughter I used to know. For a moment, I almost saw her. Then she quietly added, "What happens to us if you do this?" And just like that, the illusion disappeared again. Still money. Always money. That night, I couldn't sleep. Rain hammered against the windows, while Margaret's words replayed endlessly inside my head. They were good kids. I used to hate hearing that memory. Now I hated realizing she was right. At around 1 a.m, Emma found me sitting alone in the hallway. "You should be resting," I smiled weakly. "My mind won't let me." Emma sat beside me quietly. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then she suddenly said, "You know, most people here don't cry because they're old." I looked at her. They cry because they feel forgotten. That sentence stayed with me, because she understood something my children never did. Old age isn't the painful part. Loneliness is. The next morning, Michael arrived carrying finalized transfer papers. This was it, the point of no return. He placed the folder carefully onto the table beside me. "Once this is signed, your children can't challenge much." I stared at the papers silently, then asked something unexpected. "Do you think I've failed as a father?" Michael looked genuinely surprised. "George, no." Honestly, he sighed heavily before answering. "I think you loved your children so much, you never forced them to become better people." That hurt, because it was true. I finally picked up the pen. Every property, every investment, every account. Transferred, part to Emma, part to the Elderly Care Foundation. Nothing wasted, nothing handed to greed. The moment I signed the final page, I felt something unexpected. Peace, because for the first time in years, I stopped rewarding people for hurting me. But my children still didn't know everything yet. That came 3 days later. All 3 arrived together, and the moment they walked into my room, I knew panic had finally replaced confidence. Daniel looked furious. Rebecca looked terrified. Eric looked pale. Then Daniel slammed his hand onto the table beside my bed. "Tell us the truth." I calmly looked up. About what? About the money. There it was. Not, "How are you feeling?" Not, "Are you okay?" Just money. Always money. And for the first time in my life, I felt absolutely nothing while looking at my children. No anger, no heartbreak, just clarity. Because sitting there in that quiet little room, watching panic spread across their faces, I finally understood something important. The moment people start valuing your money more than your presence, they've already lost you. 3 days after discovering the truth about the inheritance, my children came back to the nursing home together. Not confident this time, not arrogant. Terrified, the moment they entered my room, I noticed something strange immediately. Nobody spoke about money first. Daniel looked exhausted. Rebecca's eyes were swollen from crying. Even Eric seemed smaller somehow, like reality had finally crushed whatever arrogance used to live inside him. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Daniel quietly asked, "Did you really give everything away?" I looked out the window before answering. Yes, silence filled the room instantly. Heavy silence. The kind families leave behind after saying things they can never take back. Rebecca sat beside my bed slowly. "You gave strangers our future." Strangers, funny word. Because the people she called strangers had cared for me more than my own children. I looked directly into her eyes. No, my voice stayed calm. I gave it to people who didn't abandon me. That sentence hit harder than shouting ever could. Rebecca looked down immediately. Eric rubbed his face nervously. And Daniel just stared at the floor. Because deep down, all three finally understood something painful. They hadn't lost the money because of bad luck. They lost it because of how they treated me. Daniel finally broke the silence. We made mistakes. Mistakes, such a soft word for something so ugly. You make mistakes forgetting birthdays. You make mistakes saying things during anger. But discussing whether your father was worth keeping alive, that wasn't a mistake. That was a decision. I stared quietly at my son for several seconds, then softly asked, "Do you know what hurt the most?" Nobody answered. It wasn't the nursing home. Rebecca started crying silently. It wasn't the money conversations. Eric slowly looked away. It was realizing my children only became kind again after the money disappeared. No one spoke after that. Because there was nothing left to defend. Truth had entered the room, and truth suffocates excuses. That evening, Emma officially opened the Elderly Care Foundation funded through my estate. Not luxury projects, not expensive buildings, just warm rooms for abandoned parents. Medical care, gardens, places where old people could still feel human. When Emma invited me outside for the opening ceremony, dozens of elderly residents sat smiling beneath warm lights while soft music played through the courtyard. And for the first time in years, the nursing home no longer felt depressing. It felt alive. Emma stood beside my wheelchair quietly, watching families hug elderly residents. Then she smiled softly. Margaret would have loved this. That sentence hit me harder than she realized, because suddenly I remembered Margaret driving through a snowstorm years ago just to bring me soup when I had the flu at the garage. That was love. Not promises. Effort, care, presence, and standing there beneath those warm lights, I finally understood what my wife tried warning me about all those years. Love without respect eventually becomes sacrifice without limits. Later that night, my children asked to speak with me privately one last time. The atmosphere inside the room felt completely different now. No fake confidence, no manipulation. Just exhaustion. Daniel sat quietly near the window while rain tapped softly against the glass. Then finally he whispered, "We thought you'd always forgive us." That sentence broke something inside me. Because it was honest. For the first time in months, someone was finally telling the truth. My children spent their entire lives believing Dad would always save them, always protect them, always give them another chance. And maybe that was my failure too. Rebecca slowly wiped tears from her face. "Do you hate us?" I looked at all three of them carefully, then toward the dark, rainy window. No, their faces shifted slightly, not relief. Confusion. I took a slow breath. I hate what greed turned you into. Rebecca covered her mouth crying. Eric stared silently at the floor. And Daniel, for the first time in his life, looked ashamed. Real shame. Not fear of losing money, not panic. Shame. A few minutes later, Daniel quietly stood up. We should go. Nobody argued. Nobody begged. Because deep down, they already understood this wasn't really about inheritance anymore. It was about consequences. Rebecca stopped near the doorway before leaving. Then softly whispered, "I really did love you, Dad." For several seconds, I just looked at her. Part of me wanted to believe her. Maybe part of it was true. But love without loyalty eventually becomes meaningless. So instead of answering, I simply nodded. And one by one, my children walked out of the room. I watched them disappear down the hallway while rain rolled slowly down the windows beside me. I didn't know if they would ever come back. Honestly, I didn't know if I wanted them to. But for the first time in months, That uncertainty no longer felt painful. It felt like freedom.